We will say it like it really is.
With dignity and respect.
Committed to free speech and common sense.
Upbeat and entertaining.
Straight talking and direct.
We may agitate each other and you.
Heartfelt and passionate.
Thought-provoking, provocative and controversial.
Fearless and truthful.
What a difference a couple of weeks makes. Before last Thursday, we were predicting a Tory landslide in the election, and then the political world got turned upside down. But Theresa May seems to be carrying on as normal, as if none of it had happened. As she said after that humiliating dementia tax U-turn,
nothing has changed. Nothing has changed.
Almost everyone called it wrong, including one of this country's foremost political experts, a man who rarely makes a bad call. The esteemed broadcaster and journalist, Mr. Nicholas Ferrari. In fact, he was so confident that Theresa May would get a majority that he made this pledge.
Very dark. I give you this pledge. If the Conservatives lose seats, I will wear your green jumpsuit. I tell you that now, the next Thursday after the election, if they lose seats.
The nation looks forward to it.
Well, the nation has suffered enough, but there we are. A very dark day, it has to be said. A very dark day. But what makes you think I haven't honoured my pledge? Here's one I made earlier.
You haven't. My goodness, you've
Nearly
lost weight. You've lost weight, Nick. You've lost a lot of weight, Nick. On with the show, and it's a politics fest this week. Carol will say it's time to lay off Mrs May and give the PM our backing. Graham reckons it's the young what won it for Corbyn. Greg sees a glimmer of hope for us Remainers. And Nick will admit that he has become totally irrelevant.
True.
She promised us strong and stable leadership in the national interest, not a Corbynite coalition of chaos. Well, she's apologised to MPs for getting us into this hot mess, but to the public, she's repeating robotic sound bites about getting on with the job.
A cabinet that will get on with the job of government, and we're going to be getting on with the job. What the public want is to ensure that the government is getting on with that job. But what I'm doing now is actually getting on with the immediate job. This is a government getting on with the job.
But nothing disguised the fact that she's in office, but she's not in power. She's merely being propped up in Downing Street by the DUP and Tory Eurosceptics desperate to avoid an immediate election. This makes Mrs May a puppet PM, with the DUP and its 10 MPs on one side and hard Brexit shop stewards on the other, pulling her strings, and the nation's expected to swallow her platitude that nothing has changed. She's only being allowed to squat at number 10 on sufferance, so long as she sticks with the programme and doesn't succumb to pressure to pursue a soft or softer Brexit. We have to ask, is it really in the national interest to have our children and grandchildren's futures determined by a woman on life support, a hostage in Downing Street?
I love that line going round at the moment, by the way, that Mrs May is between the devil and the DUP, which I think is so clever. And there will not be an Ulsterman with a pothole in his road by the time this all comes to an end. But what you seem to be arguing for, if I'm right, is that you would want to do it again? You would want a general election again? Is that what you're saying? She should have thrown her hands up and said, this is a complete disaster? Is that what you're saying? Because I honestly don't think there's the appetite. I think we all refer to... And Brenda in Bristol, of course, is the greatest political sage of all.
Not another one.
And I don't think... I'm damn certain the Conservatives don't want one.
Well, you know why they don't want one, because they see Corbyn, the barbarians are at the gate, Nick.
Depends who was leading the party, and we probably will come on to that later. No, it depends who was at the helm. So the Conservatives don't want
Corbyn is not leaving the Labour Party, Nick.
No,
come on.
the Conservatives.
I see, sorry.
And I don't think Labour can afford one. And I honestly, and I will shut up now, but I'm certain my listeners on LBC, they don't want one at the moment. Really, I think they are election exhausted.
Before you finish, though, there is a difference between not wanting another election...
But what are you saying?
...and having...
What are you saying? Are you saying she moves aside and someone else takes over the party?
I think there's no evidence so far that actually she's had the software update that is needed in order for her to proceed, for the device to be operating properly.
But I'm just moving you further down the line. So should she quit and have another election?
Nick, admit, she is a caretaker PM.
I totally agree.
She's not going to take us into another election.
No, I agree.
So what I'm saying is we're going to have uncertainty about her tenure as long as she's in Downing Street.
So are you saying she should stand down?
She has no authority. It's a complicated situation. Don't force me into saying... I'm just stating the facts. She is a Prime Minister in power, but not in authority.
I think she should have stood down, personally. I think she's lost all authority. She took us into an election that she didn't need... Yeah. So she could get a bigger majority. I don't blame her for doing that. All politicians would have done. Any politician would have done that. But when you fail, you have to go. And she should have actually resigned.
She should have resigned, you're right. But the fact that she didn't... And the thing is, if we keep picking at her now... You know, she has now lost all authority in Europe. They're mocking her, the collapse of her authority in Europe. So when she goes in there to get us a deal, we're going to get a weaker deal than we got before. She should have resigned, or we should have sacked her, but we haven't. And I think she's been quite gutsy to stay on, actually, because she knew the humiliation that was coming. Quite rightly, she knew about the anger, she knew all of that, but she stayed on. And because she stayed on, there really is no alternative. Your brother's going to get it eventually, but even he says, not now. If she's there, we have to back her, because Britain's future actually does depend on her.
But isn't she staying on, Graham, in Downing Street at a very high price?
Oh,
Northern Ireland peace process.
Absolutely, but obviously we can't sack her. That's up to
the
in-house. The Tories should have done something. But I think there's no obvious replacement for her.
Exactly.
This coalition, potentially or likely coalition with the DUP.
It's not actually going to be a coalition.
But this relationship. This relationship with the DUP is going to cause a huge rift as well within the political establishment. I think without doubt, because of the DUP's background and what they stand for. So I think we're in an unholy mess. And actually, I think it is a case of patching her up and getting her out there. And as long as you can. I don't think it necessarily plays into the Brexit argument so much, because I think that we've got to almost try and isolate that and think of that as a separate subject going forwards. But in terms of your subject and the authority or lack of authority that she has, I mean, it's obvious. I mean, she's got no charisma. She's going to, every time she speaks in public, people are going to be picking holes in her. But I think
the alternative is all of this is going to do is cause a Tory split, and the Tory split means one thing. It means Jeremy Corbyn in government, and it means all his hard-left policies. Now, if that's what the Tories want...
That split's been there for a long time,
They should keep on picking at her.
The split's been there for a long time.
I want to ask the panel, do we think if she remains in power as PM, will actually the Tory party split as she tries to go forward with her plan, which is still the Lancaster House programme? She has not deviated one jot from saying we're going to leave Europe, leaving the single market, all the rest of it. And yet she's got more Remainers in her cabinet.
They let her run with it. They let her be the woman who takes Britain out of Europe, who perfects the Brexit. And then there's nothing Tories love more than stabbing each other in the chest. Power and warfare is what they love. So let her take this through the Brexit. Probably the country won't actually like the whiff of Brexit when it actually gets there. She then carries the cost. Boom, there's a fight, and who knows gets the part.
But it's not inconceivable that there has to be another election in the next couple of years. That actually there's not. It's quite a small majority. In the old days, if you tried to, even with the DUP, it's a small majority.
But in 74, 79, it was the same thing.
Yes,
Greg's right, because she went into this election because she needed a bigger majority, because she knew that by the time of the next election, the Brexit would have hit the fan. And she needed that big cushion of 50 or so MPs who were going to lose their seats when everybody realised what a terrible idea Brexit is, in order for the Tories to remain in power.
Say that.
No, Nigel Lawson says that.
Hang on, but that's why she had to go, because she called an election only to increase her majority, because she said, if I don't get this, I can't deliver that. Well, she can't deliver that now because she's got less, so in which case she shouldn't have stayed. And it's up to the Tory party to decide who will be the leader.
My argument with it is that they couldn't deliver... When we talk about they couldn't deliver that, the way they conflated Brexit with an election, I think, was fundamentally wrong with their whole campaign, which is why Labour did so much better than people expected and why they did so much worse. Because that is such an unknown quantity, Brexit. The fact that all they did was push that divided, I think, the voting population even more and has left left her in an even more vulnerable position because she didn't base it on policies that, if you did get a mandate as a majority, you could then start to cherry pick, as we know with mandates. I'm really against mandates because manifestos, because I just think they're full of promises that are never delivered. So, changing my word mandate for manifesto, I meant. Right. The fact is that if they'd gone with a more domestic manifesto, I think they would have got better support. But the fact they went all after Brexit...
But they didn't go after Brexit. This election was about everything but Brexit, Graham. This was about social care, the dementia tax. It was about student debt. It should have been about Brexit, but it didn't turn out to be like that for the Tories.
Because they got outmanoeuvred by the Labour Party.
Yes.
And the Labour Party produced a manifesto. This is wonderful for the Labour Party because they're not in power. So they don't have to do it, because, I mean, many of us think what they were saying was too expensive and couldn't be done. But they're not in power. They seem to have won.
Well...
Yes, no, they seem to have won.
They think they've won. No one else thinks they've won.
Well, every observer, everybody writing about it, the rest of it sees it as a disaster for her and a success for Corbyn. So they seem to have won. At some stage, there's going to have to be another election. You can't go into the Tories can't, not this year maybe, but the Tories can't go into an election with her as the leader.
No.
But, the thing is, we are where we are, and we start Brexit talks next week.
Can't believe you said we are already.
We are where we are. She is leader. They should have either sacked her, they haven't sacked her. So to keep picking her apart now, that only damages us on a world stage.
You could argue who's us, but anyway, let's move on, because we'll be discussing Mrs May all through the programme, I have no doubt.
We will.
But as a Remainer, I want to gloat this week. After months of listening to the Brexiteers like Nick and Carol telling us to forget our opposition to leaving the European Union and to just accept the reality, suddenly it's not reality at all. A soft Brexit is not only back on the agenda, but looks more likely than not. Make no mistake, last week's election results were a victory for those of us who have been arguing that if we are to leave the EU, it must be on sensible terms for both sides, terms which can only be achieved by proper discussion, not by threats and bullying, Theresa May style. Now is the time for the members of Parliament who are Remainers, Labour, Tory, Liberal and SNP, who never supported Brexit, and certainly not a hard Brexit, to put their tribal differences aside and get together. After all, between them, they are the majority of MPs. It's time for them to tell Mrs May, and possibly even tell Messrs Corbyn and MacDonald, where to get off. They should tell her, in particular, we are the masters now.
I just think that's funny. There's absolutely...
that's the first thing I've said in 10 weeks.
No facts, no evidence to support your claim that last week's vote was about the electorate rejecting Brexit. And there's not a shred of evidence that the British people have changed their minds about Brexit.
She's in denial.
No, I'm not in denial. You guys are.
You're in
when
denial.
You say, this gives us a sensible conversation, the sensible conversation for you guys is that we stay in the customs union, that we stay in the single market. That's no Brexit. That's not a soft Brexit. That's no Brexit. Because Leavers voted to leave the single market. They knew exactly what they were doing. They voted to leave the single market. They voted for free trade around the world and with the EU. And they voted to control our borders. So your sensible conversation isn't what their sensible conversation is.
The problem was, with those two things, leaving the customs union, leaving the single market, wasn't on the side of a bus, was it, for the referendum?
Oh, that's just such
so people but people weren't voting for that. They didn't... people weren't in the referendum. That wasn't the question they were asked.
85% of the people who voted in this election voted for pro-Brexit parties.
But that's such a false statistic in the sense that...
a false statistic.
Because people voted for the Labour Party, it doesn't mean they were also voting for Brexit.
In their manifesto, the Labour Party said we had to leave not leaving, even John McDonnell said it last week, not leaving the single union was a betrayal of people who voted Brexit.
But
he said
hang on, McDonnell was never in favour. He's always been a Brexiteer, as has Corbyn. But the vast bulk of the people who voted for the Labour Party didn't vote for for Brexit.
7 out of 10 Labour constituencies voted for Brexit.
Yeah,
isn't it true?
Sure, but no, I said the people who voted for the Labour Party.
Greg, just to clarify, are you saying there should now be no Brexit or a gentle Brexit?
No, it should be a gentle Brexit.
What's a gentle?
But then I say, I'm sorry, I think, if you recall, I thought one of the most powerful bits from Jeremy Corbyn, which was a tremendous campaign, was when he said we need a different attitude to Brexit. We need to take the heat and the anger out of the room. Because I'm paraphrasing, that's right. And I think he's absolutely right, because when you go in to get a divorce or go in to do a business deal, you don't necessarily start with your sleeves rolled up, one in a fist fight the minute you walk in. So I think, Carol, to say that if you voted Labour, you were voting for a very different Brexit, which underscores, I would say, your argument, Craig.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I've been involved in business all my life and done all sorts of negotiations. I've never seen anyone who walks in and basically punches you on the nose and says, and that's what I want.
How has she done that? You go in and say what you want.
No, all negotiation is about making sure they get something and you get something.
So what you give them? You give them the 100 billion that
you will have to. Well, even Mrs May, you should have to give them something.
Give them something, yeah, and find out what we're getting for that something.
Yeah, but you're not doing the negotiation. And unfortunately, I no longer think she can do the negotiation because I don't think you can trust her.
She can't.
And I don't think, and they think she's a joke figure. Now.
Yeah, Carol's wrong and Carol's right, because Theresa May did call the election. She said it was a Brexit election. She continued during the campaign saying the June the 8th poll was the only poll that mattered. So she lost her mandate on the Brexit election. That said, Carol has a point. There is no such thing as a soft Brexit.
Or a hard
if you
Brexit.
remain in the ECJ, if you remain in the single market and the customs union, you're not leaving Europe. So what we have, a soft Brexit is look at it like this: is Hotel California. You check out, but you never leave. The hard Brexit is we leave everything, we crash out. 97% of EU nurses stop, applying for the NHS. Our economy tanks. We're Fawlty Towers, but minus Manuel, because we're not going to have any of the people who are going to come in and serve in our coffee shops, in our free. It's so
nothing
the
like
country has to decide whether it wants Brexit or no Brexit. It's not soft, hard, fast, clean, open or shut. It's Brexit or no Brexit.
How about successful Brexit?
No, it doesn't exist.
How about successful? Yes, it can.
What is a successful Brexit?
Why can't we have a...
Name me one advantage of Brexit. There's not a nebulous sovereignty argument.
A successful Brexit would be for us to negotiate a deal where we can trade with the rest of the world and with the EU in a frictionless agreement. And the only way we're going to get a frictionless agreement is if they decide to give us...
If she went in and said that, they'd say that's cake and eat it. That's the thing that inflames our European partners more than anything else. You're either in or you're out of the club.
Okay, so let's be out. Let's walk away without a deal.
Fawlty Towers.
Let's walk away without
That's what you want.
What I'm saying is that you're now on the losing side. The people who believe we're going to walk away with no deal, it's just not realistic anymore.
So Peace Today saying that even if we walk away with no deal, we will be 156 billion quid a year better off immediately.
OK, let me show you a clip let me show you a clip from the real hero of this election, if you look at it, Ruth Davidson.
Lord Buckethead.
Let's have a look. Let's have a look at what Ruth Davidson said about this.
Yeah, well, look, there's an awful lot of issues surrounding Brexit that need to be discussed. Clearly, there is no majority government that's come through after this election, and that means that we do have to listen to other parties. It means we have to listen to other actors and agents, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
So, I mean, and if she can control her 12 MPs or whatever it is, she can decide what we do. She is very powerful. Because the DUP aren't really that powerful. They're just getting a load of money for Northern Ireland, which of course will upset a lot of the Welsh and the Scots. But she has real power in the Conservative Party now, because she's the only one who seemed to be a winner in the Conservative Party in this. And she was a Remainer, and she, with the Scottish people voting to remain, and she can influence it. And I think that...
Disregarding the majority of the will of the British people in the process.
I think that is as well. Oh, no, there will be a proper discussion. We will end up with a proper discussion, as opposed to Mrs May deciding herself and overruling everybody.
But the point is, Greg, the point is, though, for me, is that none of us know how the negotiations are going to play out. I think we've got a consistently sort of weakening hand in some respects. This, the election being the most recent thing that weakens us a bit. But isn't it time that people were really just very honest about how this could play out? It can only play out, I think, two ways. One is we leave completely, and that satisfies the majority, the 52%. But we have to be realistic about what leaving completely is and actually deal with that. And we've got 18 months to try and prepare for what that looks like. but it's based on reality. There's no... I can't see how there is a reality where everyone wins.
But
it purely doesn't work.
Is what will come to pass is that we'll end up with something like the Norway Agreement, which actually means you're not in it. You still pay a massive fee. It means you still have freedom of movement, and it means that you have to take EU laws without ever being able to contribute to them. That's what we'll end up, which we might as well stay in if that's going to be the case.
But that's what Rachel's saying.
But that's pointless.
Carol, you concede the point that Greg made, that the opening tone set by Mrs May was not the correct one.
But how do you go into negotiations with... You don't go in meek, you go in strong, don't you?
No, you don't go in head-butting. You don't go in head-butting.
Well, she wasn't head-butting.
Oh, she was.
On the one hand, you're saying she's weak and boring. On the other hand, you're saying she's head-butting. She went in saying she has a responsibility to say what this country wants. She's not going to... She shouldn't be cowering behind closed doors.
She's never asked the country what it wants.
Well, the country told her...
She hasn't consulted anyone else on
the country gave her
on Brexit, on the shape of Brexit. All she said was a stronger, better Brexit. It's completely meaningless formulation. She never explained Brexit at all during the election.
I think it's pretty
We elect a parliament to represent us. They should be consulted now. That's all I'm saying. And if they've got any sense, the Remainers will get together and say, right, these are the conditions now. These are the conditions. We're not leaving it to you, Mrs May, because you have no authority anymore. You are yesterday's president. Oh, what was it that George Osborne called her?
A dead woman walking. And that's a bit on that. He's doing that because he just doesn't want the Tories to do anything now because they sacked him.
Well, they can't do anything because they haven't got any power.
And there's a man who walked away from his responsibilities as well, walked away from his constituents because he didn't have a ministerial job anymore. That's what
he left Parliament.
Yeah, he left,
I don't think that
he got sacked as a minister. And
because Mrs May famously told him that he was out of touch with the Conservative voters and then she went on to prove how close in touch he was with them.
OK, so I want to start this week with a few facts. Fact 1. Contrary to the deluded protestations of the Corbynistas, the Tories won the election. Fact 2. They're by far the biggest party with a 42% share of the vote, the biggest any leaders had since Blair's 1997 landslide. Fact 3. This election result was not a protest vote from the anti-Brexit brigade. At least 85% of us voted for pro-Brexit parties. Those that wanted a second referendum, the Greens and the Lib Dems, lost votes. All that said, Theresa May cocked it up royal style. She waged one of the most inept, lacklustre, kamikaze election campaigns I've ever witnessed. And yes, it would have been easier for her to quit, but she didn't. She decided to plough on despite the tsunami of criticism, humiliation and abuse she knew was coming, because she knows that leaving Britain rudderless at one of the most important times in its history could be catastrophic. Which is why it's shameful that a bunch of self-serving Tory Remainers are now using the chaos to try and sabotage Brexit and in the process trashing any chance we ever had of getting a good deal. Like it or not, Mrs May is going nowhere for now. So let's get behind her. Britain's future depends on it.
Now, Carol, you might be quite surprised here to say that actually you have an argument.
Oh, hello.
Only the best we've ever got to say,
you have an argument. Because there is no doubt, I mean, that when the Tories won the last election, they only got 37% of the vote, and they got a majority of 17, I think. This time they get 42% of the vote, and they don't get a majority. That's as far as our agreement goes. Right? That's as far as I go. But that's all about the strain, because you've got to accept that 58% didn't vote for her. 58% voted against her.
Well, 42% did, and that was the biggest landslide, as I said, since Tony Blair's.
But our electoral system is our electoral system. And people like you have been... those of us who believe in proportional representation, people like you have been arguing against it forever.
No,
you can't start using it now. I mean, the truth is, she ran a terrible campaign, as you said.
She did.
And she lost.
No, she didn't lose. She won the election.
Well, she didn't win the election. You can't.
She did.
You can't take a majority government into being a minority government and say you won the election.
You know, you can. You can say she won the election. She lost seats. It was a bad move, and her campaign made her lose seats. I completely get all that. I accept all of that.
Well, it's much worse than that, because what she really told us was that she couldn't go in and do the Brexit negotiations unless she got a bigger majority, and she hasn't got a majority at all now. So how can we let her go and do the Brexit negotiations?
Look, the bottom line is, if Brexit isn't sorted, we could be in political and economic chaos for the next decade. It needs to be sorted, and she is the one going to sort it now, majority or not. She's going in to do it. Labour have already said they don't want cross-party talks.
I might have misinterpreted. From your introduction to this, are you saying she did a good job?
No, I'm saying she did a terrible job.
Right.
But, no, I'm saying she did a terrible job. I thought the campaign was one of the worst campaigns I've ever seen. She lost seats.
Right. Yeah, but you say the fact that she got this massive share, the best, I think you said, since Tony Blair night. So what's the underlying point then? She did a terrible job, but she managed to attract...
No, my underlying point is the Tories have won the election. We've got to get behind her and them now instead of pulling her apart, because pulling her apart does not do this country any good.
This is like a dictatorship.
Yes, but
how is it like a dictatorship?
No, Carol, who's we've got to get behind her?
The country.
The country. The
So
country
what's
is
the
me
alternative
and
if you
her and the
don't
rest
get-
of us, and we don't agree with her.
So you don't get behind her, what happens?
I don't go. Why will I possibly want to get behind her? I didn't vote for her. I don't like her. I think she's terrible. I think she should have gone. Why would I want to get behind her?
But she hasn't gone.
Why would I want to get behind her? I think she'll be the worst person
Carol,
possible.
are you saying that it's time to be patriotic and get behind Brexit?
Oh, that's
irrespective of whoever is going to lead those negotiations. I mean, because from my point of view, she's got to keep as far away from negotiations as possible. You've got to send in a team.
All of you can say that, but that's not what's going to happen. She's going to be there. She's going to be part of those negotiations. And I think us pulling her apart in public every day, eviscerating her the way it's happened over the past week, is a pointless exercise.
I sort of think she turned out to be a bloody difficult woman to vote for.
Yeah.
And on election night, she couldn't even sack herself. I mean, how she is going to be the strong, stable candidate to take us through what is going to be the most politically difficult period of this country's history since, I don't know, since the war. How can she do it?
No, I don't.
Greg, we've got to get...
So if Mr Corbyn had won, say Mr Corbyn was now the Prime Minister, and he'd be having to do the negotiation, you'd be making the same argument, would you?
No, I wouldn't.
That's your argument, Dave.
Simply because he has zero experience in Europe and zero experience in government.
It's no point. You said she is now the Prime Minister and we should get behind her. That's what all Tories say when they're in trouble.
It's like saying that someone who works in a sweet shop can actually run the country. They can't. Jeremy Corbyn does not know how to deal with Europe. He's never had to.
She does. Actually, can I just say...
She does better.
Can we just actually acknowledge she has been quite endearing since she was reprogrammed on Friday.
Exactly. And she
went over and she watched the footy with President Macron. And she did the Mexican wave in a way that none of us have ever seen it done before.
Let's have a look. Let's have a look.
Shall we? Can we do?
Been photoshopped from part of her campaign because that looks really.
By the way, did you see the way
I think that's her holding her hands up to Corbyn. I think she's saying, "I give in." Yes.
Did you see the way President Macron looked into her eyes when he met her?
It was love.
He had me. He had me. In a moment, he had me.
He does like an older woman, Carol. So we're in with a chance.
I did tweet and say, "Am I too old?"
He was allowed to stay up that night, despite it being a school night, by his wife. He did very well, Macron, that night.
But the thing is, she has been contrite. She has sacked those two numpties who were advising her, thank goodness.
So she threw them under the bus because
she sacked them to keep her own position.
They've been keeping her in government for years.
Well, they haven't done a very good job.
Not years.
And now she has said she would be more inclusive. She will now include the cabinet. She's going to have to learn.
Poor old Carol's in the corner here.
All right, let's look at... If you talk to anybody who was in that cabinet when she was the Home Secretary... She was a pain in the arse the whole time, and she was a pain, and she carried on being a pain in the arse, and now she can't be. So suddenly she's going to be a new.
We've guaranteed the pledge is not going to be shown on Thursday night.
The people who said she was a pain in the arse are the very people who pushed her into leadership just a few months ago.
Let's move this on. So what do we do? What do we do with her? We try and get behind her, not question her, not allow the...
Of course we question her. She's not my choice. I wouldn't necessarily have her there. But she is there. The Tories have decided to let her go on with it. What's the point of just obstructing her?
Is she not just a figurehead, basically? She's going to have no power within the party.
Who's going to be controlling her in a cabinet that is so split between Remain and Leave? Actually, more Remain than Leave. How can that work?
No, there's more Tory MPs want to leave than Remain.
No, not in the cabinet. Carol,
well, we've got
20 plays 7 in the cabinet. Yes. 20 Remainers plays 7 Brexiteers in the cabinet.
In the cabinet.
She's
generally Tories, she needs support from the whole party, and she would have it from the whole party.
No, but if take Parliament overall, there's a vast majority wanting to remain. So let's let them have some influence as opposed to just... I mean, she basically didn't want to consult her cabinet about anything she was doing, talking about anything else.
What are they going to have influence over, though? Because ultimately, is there going to be more debate around, the customs union and...
Well, the first thing's going to be the size of the cheque, isn't it?
Yes.
Because that's what, in terms of sequencing, our EU partners want that settled before they talk about trade. And the reason one of the bigger reasons she wanted the majority was because what if they want 100 billion before they even start open talks, Nick?
And that's a ridiculous thing.
It is an absolute nightmare, but I can't... It is. I come back to this idea. I think sort of Greg did rather destroy your argument, respectively, that if it was Mr Corbyn, we wouldn't actually have to carry on and be brave and salute
That's
the
just
flag.
because it's Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, all right. Okay.
Well, we're going to have to let that one go and go and go, I think. The next 18 months are certainly going to be fascinating. Anyway, coming up next, forget the X Factor. Now there's the Jez Factor. When Jeremy Corbyn was elected Labour leader in 2015, he promised a new kind of politics. Lots of people scoffed at this, and many, including myself, underestimated his appeal. But it seems he's actually done it. Against the Tories' campaign of fear and doubt, he offered hope and change, and millions of people got behind him. You can't imagine chants like this about Theresa May. Now, of course, he didn't win, but he brought a new narrative, and in the process, he got lots of young people engaged in politics. With positive policies that spoke straight to the youth vote, he encouraged the next generation to believe in something. Some of this obviously got through. YouGov estimates that the turnout for under 25 was almost 60%. That's far higher than any recent general election, when it's been around 40%. So I hope the message that all political parties will take from this election is that you have to appeal to young people. And you do that by being positive and not negative.
Seeing that concert reminds you that he had the advantage of that he had a successful cult of personality built around him by social media and by events and live events like that, whereas Theresa May sadly had the cult of no personality, which didn't help her at all. I got 3 children in the 18 to 24 age group. 2 of them voted for Theresa May, and 1 of them voted for Jeremy Corbyn, and was really passionate about it. And it was all about putting a twib in on Facebook, and a sense that he was offering hope against fear. But it wasn't just the giveaways either. It was to do with he really did connect with them, and he was talking about the society he wanted. But you're right. I mean, Tories are hopeless in harnessing the youth vote. And this, what you said in your cue reminded me when I went to edit The Lady, and I discovered that our average age of our reader was 75 to 84. And when they didn't cancel their subscriptions because I'd edited it, they were dying off. And the Tories are facing the same problem. And it's called in business terms the replenisher audience. You've got to find people to come up to replace the ones who are dying off or voting elsewhere.
He did engage them in a new kind of politics, but it was fantasy politics. He pulled off the greatest con trick of all time by telling students that he would cancel their student debt.
But don't all politicians do that? Let's be honest.
No, listen. I think it's fantastic. Young people should vote whatever, but when they vote, they should be responsible about it, and they should know what they're voting for. They shouldn't believe this tosh.
I'd ban them from voting, actually. I think it's
ban the electorate completely.
Yes, that's what I meant.
A promise that was uncosted and could never be fulfilled.
Absolutely, totally uncosted.
Absolutely,
totally fantasy. A load of balls.
Absolutely. I'll tell you what, like every manifesto.
No.
Since time began.
The only thing they didn't say is vote Labour and we'll give you a free laptop. That's the only bloody trick they didn't come up with. It's just nonsensical.
No, but it was quite interesting, wasn't it? That he knew how to appeal to the youth audience by cancelling tuition fees, by getting all of that. And Mrs May, of course, in some ways quite morally, actually attacked.
She's hobbled by being in power,
base.
of course.
But she also thought she also thought she was so easy to win. She could put things into the manifesto that were unpopular.
Yeah, that was
But she was the only one.
And that killed her.
But it's easy to promise hope and milk
course.
and honey
That's what
when
young
you
people
think
want.
you're never going to have to deliver it. You know, no one was more surprised about Corbyn's success in this election than Labour itself. Their own polling people didn't predict this, and they didn't believe the exit poll themselves on the very night.
But
so it's easy to promise the earth when you're never going to have to deliver.
Aren't you completely dismissing the intelligence of young people,
No.
saying that it was all based on targeted manifesto promises that aren't costed properly?
I'm not dismissing them.
Ultimately, the difference is, you know, everyone's cynical about manifestos. I really believe that. Everybody knew there was enough argument, there was enough debate about the money tree and those sorts of things to tear holes in Labour's manifesto. But still, young people connected with them. To Rachel's point, there was a certain amount of momentum, and I don't use that as ironically, because momentum, the part of that party, had a big part to play in it. They didn't spend a huge amount of money, but they knew how to activate.
They knew how to target
through social media,
by promising things that could never happen. Every analyst who's looked at Corbyn's policies, his manifesto, has said it would have bankrupted the country.
Yeah, but
I'm not dissing their intelligence. I think they are politically naive.
Yeah.
They're being the young.
Yeah,
and it's interesting, actually, to Greg's, that Theresa May was actually put forward in her manifesto this arsenic of policy, which was the death tax, which actually was the only thing that addressed social injustice, intergenerational social injustice. Yes. And that absolutely did for her.
Graham, this is a generation that lives on pot noodles and Londis House vodka. It is hardly surprising that they were duped to this. I am saying no one below the age of 25 should be able to vote unless they own a house.
No, and I'm all for getting...
And I'm calling for that now.
And I'd take out the over 70s because they were so boring and conservative. So actually, we're into quite a...
We got there. All right.
I thought what was interesting about it, actually, was it showed that this group who meet here we weren't in touch.
No, absolutely.
We didn't realise this was happening.
No. The youth quake.
We really didn't realise it was happening.
But it all happened very late in the day. The amount of registrations that happened...
Yes, but
you know,
I knew the last day, 620...
And it all changed over that 4-week period. So the swing from... We've all agreed May's campaign was an absolute disaster. But the Labour campaign, despite the falsehoods of the manifesto, it still engaged with people. And I think that young people, were actually finally having something that they could get behind and were angry enough to be motivated to want to do something about it, albeit too late.
If you go back to 1945, I mean, just like a long time, it's even before me, but go back to 1945.
Questionable.
I mean, you would have said that about Labour's manifesto after the war. You'd have said this can't possibly be a way forward. The economy is a disaster, and yet they did. They stood on it, and they did it. The NHS, housing, social welfare, all those things, they did them. I think, actually, some of what Labour was talking about was deliverable. I also think it was a very clever manifesto. It didn't say it didn't do the old Labour bit, we're going to regain control of the commanding heights of the economy.
Every time anybody was asked a question about how you'd pay for it, or indeed Jeremy Corbyn was asked a question, they couldn't come up with an answer.
Well, they did come up with an answer. It was going to be taxing people who voted who earned more than 80,000 and raising corporation tax to 26%.
Every independent financial body that looked at it said it's a load of cobblers.
Well,
seriously.
Except the student... I mean,
the students. I've
the student loan thing was quite interesting because actually, if you really analyse student loans, you'll discover that 75% of them are being paid for by the government anyway. Because when they sell the loan book, they sell it for 25% of its value.
The two Johnson, no, not Johnson, but your two. Did they vote for the Conservatives? You know, or was it with a sort of heavy heart? Well, we've got
My youngest actually was really torn between voting Labour and voting Conservative. Obviously, there wasn't. That was the choice in this election.
But it was very black and white this year, wasn't it? I mean, if you look at the 2015 election, 18 to 24-year-olds, 43% voted. This is polled, so it's estimated.
Only 43% of 18 to 24-year-olds
That's in 2015. And here in this election, 58%. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a huge jump in a short period. And I think that is because it's people that were so polarised.
But if they struggle to get kids who've got two uncles in the cabinet, no wonder the Conservatives have got bloody problems when you think about it. I mean,
as you might have read my column last week on this very subject.
I never miss your column. I never miss it.
Good, you've got a test coming up.
The problem is it means you have to buy the Mail on Sunday. Yeah. You don't do it on a matter of principle.
We've all got to buy newspapers, so we're going to be talking about Nick's topic.
That is brilliantly done, because coming up I'll be telling you why I, and even Rach here, are becoming completely irrelevant. There is just so much to learn from last week's general election. Not just how Theresa May managed to turn just about managing from a mantra into a lifestyle choice, but how this was the moment the mainstream media was forced to swallow an unpalatable truth. It grieves me, speaking as a journalist with a family that was immersed in the newspaper trade and news ink coursing through my veins to say it, but here goes. We're not relevant anymore. We have as much influence as a discarded tissue and are as relevant as the man talking to himself on the top deck of the bus. The days a paper could claim, "It was us, what won it?" are gone. Save for suggesting he was to appoint the three horsemen of the apocalypse to the shadow cabinet, there was no smear left unturned for Jeremy Corbyn. Also, it's time for broadcasters to calm down about those debates. This was truly an election fought on social media. So, read all about it! Read all about it! The world will never be the same!
Well, I'm glad you finally admit you're irrelevant.
Yes.
I've been working with you for 2 years. Bit like my football career, to be honest.
Yes, indeed.
Now, post-football career. Anyway, no, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's absolutely staggering how newspapers have been so ineffectual in this campaign. 80% of the Sunday newspapers were pro or backing Conservative agenda and had very little impact on the outcome and influence. And I think it ties into, you know, what I was saying about younger people, how people digest information and how you speak to people through social media is so different. And looking at the newspapers, certainly how I sort of read papers was around the election, was more about sort of commentary-type opinions rather than anything else. And it was I always felt when I picked up the newspaper, I'd almost heard everything I needed to hear.
It feeds into a little of what you were saying in your debate, the youth. And we'll talk about... I just want to ask you, you both have children that are far younger than mine, and indeed Greg. I sense that the sort of biff and bat of politics, the rather brutal... I don't think your generation of kids, they actually don't like that. They don't like that level of aggression. I think you miss by a country mile. Do you think...
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that the nuance of debate is certainly for my kids is part of what they grow up with, and there is no obvious one side or the other. It's the bit in between. It's the subtlety of the arguments. And my daughter voted for the first time this election, and she found it difficult on a national level to relate to either leaders, but on a local level, related to the people that best represented their party.
And this constant drumbeat, he's a terrorist sympathiser.
And they're not loyal. They're not loyal.
Did it get through?
It did. It did. But kids aren't loyal. No. In the same way. It's like with brands, and I think now we look at political parties almost as brands. You have to, you know, and that's the delicate path.
Nodding, Rachel.
Yeah, I think you've picked up on something important, which is that the young, which is an awful phrase, they don't think that newspapers reflect the world they inhabit, the social media world, the world where you have Ariana Grande putting together that One World Conference concert. What I saw on the streets of Notting Hill yesterday, which was the entire community coming together and breaking the fast of Ramadan with people waiting on them, from the posh people in their £5 million mansions to the people in the housing projects up in North Kensington. And I think when they see tabloids, which I will not name because I take their money, do 13 pages saying, you know, the troika of evil or whatever about the three leading figures in Labour. They don't think this black and white world is a world that speaks to them.
Carol, before I bring you in, let's just look. So for some of the viewers, they have to be aware who might not have seen some of these front pages. Let's take a look at one. This is from the Daily Mail, the day after Mrs May chose to call the election. Crush the saboteurs. And this was on the great day itself, the day we went to vote, and this is the Sun, Corbyn, and there he is. I'll play you perhaps something in a moment or two which speaks to how the youth vote goes. Carol, you and I have been around newspapers our entire working lives. They're not relevant in this terms, are they?
No, but you'll know it like I know. For as long as I can remember, the last 10, 15 years, say, we've been aware that young people are not reading papers.
Yeah.
You know, we spent conference after conference saying, how can we get young people on board? What can we do to attract the young? Whatever we did, we didn't attract them because they just weren't interested in papers. And my fear now is, I still think there's a place for them with older younger people with 45, 50 plus maybe. But I think kids today who aren't reading papers, they're not going to read them in 5, 10 years' time either. And this is a problem. And I saw what happened with Labour on Twitter this time round. You know, on the last day before they could register, every Labour MP was putting out tweets the whole time saying, go and register, go register. 622,000 of them registered on the very last day. That's an instruction from Twitter. A paper could never have achieved that.
Not necessarily a huge fan of newspapers, Greg. I doubt that you're shedding...
I read newspapers, but I'm of the age that still does read newspapers. I mean, personally, one of the people I think should resign along with Theresa May is Paul Dacre, because I think...
He's the editor of the Daily Mail,
I think Paul Dacre runs the Daily Mail. I think he's gone... He is not in contact at all with the youth, I don't think. And he's lost 1 million copies over... 3 or 4 years.
He's not here to defend himself, but go on.
He's not here to defend himself. No, but he's never invited us to...
Paul
Dacre doesn't invite anybody else to defend themselves from the sort of bile he puts into his newspapers.
Right, which are fairly successful in terms of newspapers, one has to say. The second best-selling paper in the land.
Yes, I know, but massively down
I know,
over the
but
years.
still in terms of the business. Greg Dunn.
Well, I think... Well, I didn't see you're trying to... You don't like this, really, do you? You don't
I take it, but the bloke's not here. That's what I'm trying to say.
All right. Where I would disagree with you a bit is actually I still think newspapers have a disproportionate influence over broadcasters, over... You go and talk to... Here at Sky, you go and talk to the Sky News people, and they still do the news... They still do every night. Some of us have done it.
But they're in business to do that.
They do.
That's exactly what they're in business to do,
But all I'm
influence
saying
people.
is that don't underestimate that a lot of the news agenda is still set by the newspapers.
I agree with that. But I don't think...
I think...
But how... And the BBC
particularly. They only have The Guardian.
The BBC... No, sadly that's not true. But what I think the BBC actually is more influenced by the Daily Mail than it is by the Guardian.
The Daily Mail still sets the agenda.
It does, on all sorts of
today's news.
But whether the economics of these newspapers survives... And whether therefore
8% for year-on-year circulation falls. That gives us 10 years, folks.
No, and the
10 years left.
No, but more than that, the advertising revenue is disappearing.
That's 17% down year-on-year.
But interesting fact...
99% of statistics go over people's heads. Will you just stop?
But the thing is, the point that you're making is about relevance, and it's undoubted. The relevance of newspapers on this election has diminished.
Well, this is what we might...
Newspapers weren't powerful. Why did George Osborne decide to edit a local free sheet and make hay from that?
To have a go at Mrs May. Revenge is a dish best served.
Because it's a fun job at a particular time in his life. Note that he did say he was leaving Parliament... For now.
This is how we might be getting campaigning in the front. I know you'll have all downloaded this, Carol, and obviously this is how perhaps campaigning will go in the future. This is a viral video for Mr Corbyn.
Shut up! Tax cuts for the Conservatives' big business friends.
Shut up!
More food banks, more homeless people.
Shut up!
There is a social crisis looming in Britain. This government's proposing to reduce it further and actually hand roughly £60 billion over to corporations and in tax relief at the top end.
And it was just hip to vote Corbyn, wasn't it?
And Theresa May had Liar Liar that hit the charts.
But
do you remember? Liar Liar.
Yes,
but equally, I mean, that's the terrifying thing, is that something that's there as a spoof, as a joke, there's the message is behind it because of what he's saying, but actually, if that resonates without people actually then really making their own minds up, that's pretty scary stuff as well, because...
That's always been the case. Anyone who's ever canvassed, who's gone out to find out, you find out, oh yes, they're voting our way. And then you listen to their views, they don't fit anything. They don't fit any of what we say. We've always known that. Certain people, it's not their lives. Politics for a lot of people... Now, suddenly for a bunch of younger people, it has become their lives. And I think that's incredibly encouraging.
But don't we think young people anyway vote Labour? I think if you're not voting Labour when you're 20, there's something wrong with you, actually.
Did you vote Labour at 20?
I voted Labour until the last election.
Until the last election?
Yeah.
God, you really have had a transformation. I mean, it's like
road to Damascus.
Yeah, road to Damascus.
Corbyn stopped me voting Labour. That's the bottom line.
What was your moment, Mr Corbyn, was the moment of epiphany?
Absolutely.
Just think, if you had a social media account, you'd have voted for him on the basis of that video.
But having heard your opinions over a period of weeks and a period of months, you're what I'm talking about, really.
No,
when you voted Labour, you didn't
I
actually
was
believe
always
it.
centre-left, always. When Blair was in power, that was my ideal, his first term. That was my ideal time.
Apart from reading their mother's column, do your children ever read newspapers?
You know what? I've tried to even pay their subscriptions. I mean, maybe we should give newspapers away to the under 25s. I know, but even so, you go on the tube and people are looking at their phones.
Yes,
but the phones, they might be reading the newspaper on their phone. They might be reading The Guardian on their phone. They might be doing... The Guardian, I mean, the number of hits The Guardian gets... The trouble is, The Guardian has no way of monitorising that.
If you were running a newspaper, what would you do? To get the youth reading it, or to try and get into their heads, or would you just say...
I think it's a loser.
I think that horse is bolted.
Yeah, it was there when we were... You know, you sometimes don't realise the things that were there when you were there, you think were there forever, and they weren't.
And we live in instant gratification. So, you know, even if on a news agenda, you want it updated quickly. You want it live, you want it updated. So by the time you've gone to print, immediately that newspaper is... 60%
and yet in your old game is a huge driver.
Yeah,
sport
I think is keeping...
They'll have a massive hit now until they all kick off again in August, and everybody...
Because of that point, that actually I think that they can review a game and they can promote the next game. So they can do that without the same timescale pressure of 24-hour news. So it's building up towards something and then reviewing it afterwards. And I think that's a different way
If only I had my whistle handy, I would blow the whistle. Because it's time... Oh, yes, indeed, the red card. Time now for Straight Talker of the Week. And our prize goes to a man who cut through the Tory spin and summed up Theresa May's position better than any of us.
She's a good Prime Minister.
Well, is she?
Yes, she is a good Prime Minister.
Well, surely her judgment is shot to pieces.
I've spent...
Well,
10...
I mean...
No, let me just answer. I've spent 10 months working for her. I've seen many Prime Ministers in the past. I've worked for others in the past. She's very good. She's a good decision-maker. And I think you'll find, in the next few weeks, people will say, actually... Yeah,
that's a bit like saying Richard Hammond's a great driver as he wakes up in hospital.
No. No, it's not.
So our prize for Straight Talker of the Week goes to Sky News' presenter and editor-at-large, Adam Bolt. Well done, Adam. Now, as they say at ceremonies such as these, Adam cannot be here to accept his award, but he did send this message.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honour to receive this award. I would like to thank, first of all, David Davis for coming in and talking about the government after its Pyrrhic victory in the general election. And I'd also like to thank Richard Hammond for inadvertently supplying me with the right car crash metaphor, giving the company he keeps. I hope he won't be offended, and I hope he recovers soon along with his new knee. But thank you very much.
Adam there, borrowing a shirt from the late, great Nelson Mandela. That's all from us. We'll see you next week.